In these problems, we need to simplify some rather complicated looking calculations. And we've got a couple of things going on. We've got absolute value symbols here, and then we've got parentheses and lots of negative signs. So I'm going to show you the ways to deal with all of those things. I like to deal with the absolute value stuff first. So here, these straight line brackets, what that means is the absolute value. And the absolute value changes everything to a positive. So if it's a negative inside, it's going to be a positive. If it's already a positive inside, it's just going to be whatever's already inside. In this case, we have a -7. That changes to a +7. And now I'm going to take this a step at a time and just rewrite the whole problem each step. So I've done this step. I'm going to rewrite what we have. We have a negative, and then in parentheses a -12. Then we have that negative sign. We did this chunk. So that's the +7. Then we have a plus sign, and in parentheses a -2. Okay. Next step is to look at if there's any calculations to be done inside the parentheses. Sometimes you'll have multiple numbers inside the parentheses or nested sets of parentheses. In this case, we just have a -2. Can't really do much with that. We have a -12. Can't really do much with that. So there's nothing to change inside the parentheses. So the next thing I look for is whether we have multiple minus signs in a row. We do right here. We have a negative, -12. Well, a negative of a negative is a positive. One way to help keep track of this is that every 2 negative signs you see in a row like this that are separated just by parentheses, you can turn to a positive, because a negative times a negative makes a positive. So a negative -12 is just 12. So this is 12 minus 7. I'm rewriting the whole problem again after doing one step. This is the way to really keep track. It's starting to look much simpler already. We have 12 minus 7, and then we have this plus a -2. Well, plus a negative is the same thing as just minus. So that's a -2, and I'll write the rest of the problem. Now we have 12 minus 7 minus 2. Well, 12 minus 7 is 5. 5 minus 2 is 3. So eventually, if you deal with that step by step, you get down to a pretty simple problem. Let's try another one. Maybe this one's a little bit more challenging. So first, I usually look for these absolute value symbols. This one has got some calculations to do inside it. We have 3 minus 5. Let's see, that would be a -2 minus 1. I think this comes out to a -3. You can double check that on your calculator if you're not sure. Just punch in 3 minus 5 minus 1. You should get a -3. And then we're going to take the absolute value of that. So a -3 becomes a +3. Let me rewrite the rest of the problem. 3 minus 2 minus the absolute value of -2 plus 3. Okay, it's looking simpler already. Let's deal with this absolute value. We have the absolute value of -2, so that just becomes a +2. And then we'll write the rest of the problem. So 3 minus 2 minus, so this was the chunk we fixed. Don't forget that minus sign there. -2 plus 3. Now I think we're in a shape where we can just punch this in on a calculator or figure it out in our head. Let's see, 3 minus 2, that's 1. 1 minus 2 is -1. -1 plus 3 is +2. All right, one more. And this one looks pretty beastly. You have all these different shapes of brackets. Don't let that throw you off. When we nest parentheses, we put parentheses inside parentheses, mathematicians will just use these different brackets to say this is a different level of nesting. But really, the square brackets, the curly brackets, you should just think of them like plain old parentheses. So we'll deal with this big chunk in a minute. I notice I've got an absolute value thing going on here, so let's figure out what that is. So we've got the absolute value of a -8. Well, a negative of a negative is a positive. So it's a +8 inside this absolute value. The absolute value of a +8 is just +8. And then, as I rewrite the rest of the problem, I can't forget this negative sign out here. So that's a negative in front of the 8. There's a negative sign here. And then we have all of these brackets. I think I got them all there. So let's deal with that. What we really have here is a whole bunch of negative signs in a row, only separated by these parentheses or these brackets. You can turn each two of these into a positive, because a negative of a negative is a positive. So I've got a negative negative 11. Boom, that's a positive. I've got a negative negative of that. That's a positive. So all of these parentheses can disappear, and all I've really got here is a negative 8 plus 11. And that equals 3. So that's a little bit of work with these complicated calculations involving parentheses and absolute value.